Every Breath You Take by The Police is a classic love song to many, but really, whenever you look at it, it's kind of creepy. It's a song about a stalker who wants this girl really bad, and there's even a line saying, every step you take, every move you make, I'll be watching you, which... No. So it's definitely creepy when put into a different light, but what is interesting about it is that whenever you think of it in a different way, say in like if you were an investigator trying to solve something, using every step someone takes might actually be important. Forensic podiatry is, in essence, the use of using footprints and materials in the feet to solve a crime. So in essence, if you really wanted to, you could say feet pics solved a crime, and you'd probably be right. For all the slack that they get, feet are actually really important when talking about the scene of a crime, because just as much as a fingerprint can link someone to a crime scene, footprints can do just the same. The odds of you and someone having the same fingerprint are 1 in 64 trillion. Feet work roughly the same way. The alignment of the bones within the foot, the way the foot is shaped, the length, the width, and the height of the foot, all are individual characteristics that can be linked to one person and be completely and repeatedly identified. These characteristics can and will be extremely important to any further dealings with the crime. When analyzing a foot, multiple measurements can be taken to fully get an idea of what type of person we're dealing with here. For instance, the measurements from the heel to the big toe, or the heel to any of the toes rather, can all be taken, and that gives an idea of how big the general foot was from the print, and then also the width at the area right underneath the toes and the area or the width at the heel all should be taken as a way to generally understand what kind of shoe size we're dealing with here. And then in the case of a severed foot, say like a train wreck or a fire where like a foot has been charred off or completely severed from a body, whatever the foot was encapsulated in, say like a tennis shoe, a sandal, or whatever, can give you generally a good idea of what person that might have belonged to. Say if you find a shoe in a bright pink sneaker, it's more likely to be a woman than a man, generally speaking. And also, like if you find a foot in a flip-flop with its nails painted, it's more likely to be a woman than, say, a foot in loafers. Things like that, the minor things, but also the major things, can help determine who it was. Feet themselves can actually be used to estimate the age, weight, general stature, and height of an individual. A medical examiner can actually open up a foot during an autopsy, look at the individual bones within the foot, the tarsals, the metatarsals, and the caneus, which is the heel bone. And looking at these can give a general, solid idea of what this person was. In fact, when it comes to the sex of the individual, there was a study from Egypt where 80 males and 80 females metatarsal bones were taken, and it was a 100% accuracy rate when determining what sex they were by using the metatarsal bones, which are the bones. If you look at a foot this way, toes here, heels here, you have your toe bones, which are the phalanges, and then the metatarsal bones, which are just above those. The first and second metatarsal bones also have a really close relationship with the stature of the individual. Generally speaking, that can give a close estimate based on how small or how large that bone is, and how tall or how short a person is. And in cases where an investigator doesn't necessarily want to open up a foot, x-rays can always be done, and generally the same sort of idea can be determined. They don't have to be physically in your hand, but just looking at them, seeing them, knowing their shapes, and then comparing that to other examples of both a male and female, it has been shown that the connection is strong to the point where, like I said, it was almost a 100% accuracy. Or it was a 100% accuracy. In terms of age and body weight when looking at a foot, similar results can be seen. For instance, in terms of age, looking at the skin of the foot that you have can give a general idea of what age this person was. Say a generally softer skin will give you a younger individual, when more of the raggedy, stretched out skin will be more of an elderly person. If you're looking at the bones, the larger the bones are, or how fused the bones are together, will determine how old the person was. And then also, the general rule for weight is the larger the person was in weight, the larger the foot and the footprint will be. And the more weight will be pushed down on that footprint and will possibly leave a larger impression on whatever surface it comes across. So while foot bones might not necessarily give you an indication of the weight, footprints generally do. In forensic investigations, like at the actual scene of a crime, multiple different kinds of foot evidence and footprint evidence can be left behind. These can be at any sort of crime scene you can think of, at a burglary, at a murder, even at an arson, if some of the accelerant is left on the ground and not burned while they're walking away from the fire. Generally, looking at the area in which the footprints are located will give you a rough idea of what could have possibly been going on in that area, rather. For instance, if you see footprints walking out of a room where there is a bloody pile, you know, put two and two together. And these tracks can also be in different varieties. They can be in an actual shoe impression, like the treads on the bottom of a sneaker or of a boot. They can be in a barefoot, which happened to have some dirt or some blood or water. You could have smear marks from a sock of some variety that can possibly indicate what was there. Since footprints are so individualistic to a person, or even owning a specific shoe, these factors can all incredibly limit down the suspect pool and the amount of people that could have been involved in this crime or been located at the scene when it happened. When analyzing the foot and the footprints, rather, there are typically 5 major methods of doing so. The first one I already mentioned is the Norman gun method, where you take measurements from the back of the heel to the tips of every toe, and also the width at the base of the foot and at the heel of the foot. And then in the Robbins method, he took the foot and split it into a grid and then analyzed each of the individual squares and then matched that to the scene taken from the crime. There are multiple ways to do it, all of which are equally effective. It's just a matter of what practice the jurisdiction or the police force decide to use for their standard. Now, about these individual characteristics, every single one or idea you can think of probably can help identify who this print belonged to. For instance, the space between toes is a great indicator of possibly who this could have belonged to. The general length, width, of course, like we talked about, and then also some of the more minute details, like are all 5 toe print impressions there? Or is the pinky toe perhaps curled over the other toe? Or is the stem mark of the big toe present because the person's big toe is larger, or they perhaps put more pressure on that side of their foot? Is the plantar print have more pressure on it in general, or is it perhaps lighter, indicating a lighter stature person? There are also other, perhaps not necessarily birth-given identification factors, but perhaps scars and other lines. For instance, bunion marks are a great way of limiting people because those are generally pretty obvious. Scars, burn marks, or other things that just do not go away from the bottom of the foot can also be very easily recognizable. One of those whodunit moments if you find one. Other minor things that could possibly link someone are very minor things, such as, are all of the toes in a line instead of being in a nice curve? Are the toes really long, like some people tend to have for some reason? Or are the toes really short? All of these things can be given and can definitely be useful. Much like fingerprints, the actual lines, ridges, and bifurcations can also be used. So the same way of studying a typical fingerprint can also be used, even down to the loops, arches, and whorls that fingerprints have. Hump marks, or the bumps underneath the toe print, or the actual pad of the toe print itself, can also be used to identify somebody. And then the presence of the arch in the print in itself is very important. Say someone has a very thin arch, implying that they are more of a arched-footed person, or say the arch is entirely across the entire foot, making it look like a caveman foot and a completely flat-footed foot. All of these things on top of themselves can all be important. On top of general forensic podiatry, there's also a specific subsection for how a person walks, or their gait. What's interesting about it is, if you notice whenever you watch someone walk, everybody walks in their own specific way. Minor things change. Everyone has a set movement pattern. It's almost like their base loop if you are a video game character. It's just the base movement everybody has. For instance, some people may walk naturally with their hands in their pockets, or be more oriented by walking on their heels more than their toes or their foot, or vice versa. Along with this, the actual length of their stride can also rule out or include people in a pool of suspects. And recently, with the evolution and more continued use of CCTV cameras and just general measurements of stride length and paying attention to how a person moves can greatly whittle down the amount of people that could possibly be involved. My best way to describe it is think of it as you know who someone is when they walk towards you, even if they had a Halloween mask on. You know who that person is because of how they walk and what's carrying them. Now, all of this information is fine, dandy, and sure, even plausible, but what has actually been done to prove that this is effective? Well, let's talk about the Milky case from Phoenix, Arizona. In December of 1989, James Steyer and Roger Scott took the son of a female friend, the son being named Christopher Milky, out to the middle of the desert and shot him to death with a revolver. Morbid, I know. At the scene of this crime, footprints were found in the sand around the body. These footprints were definitely of a running shoe, of a Nike running shoe. Roger Scott would later dump off these pairs of running shoes into the bushes of a local shopping mall because he told his wife he just didn't like them anymore, but, there's a reason. And when investigators were going through all of their possible suspects, they realized that there were 3 pairs of shoes that Scott was involved with. The one he was booked in, the ones at his house, and then the ones that were found by investigators at a later date. When using the tread analysis of these shoes to match those that are found at the scene of the crime, and also looking at the actual pressure and way this pressure is dispersed throughout his footprint, and the stride length of Scott himself, it was easily determined that these belonged to him and that he was present at the crime scene. These methods were later used to book Steyer as well. And so later on, they were both charged with first-degree murder and were both sentenced to death. V-Pix equals justice? I don't know. I should go on record in saying that as a horribly timed joke because we were talking about literal 4-year-old child murder, but a little dark humor about forensics is kind of integral to the field. You get used to it. It's fine. It's the field. You get it. Due to how new this subsection of forensic science is and how new forensic science is in general compared to other major scientific bases, societies and ways to have people come together to talk about improvements and ways to make more people fully trained on the topic are becoming more and more present. For instance, 2003 was the first year of the ASFP, the American Society of Forensic Podiatry, that was actually founded by John A. DiMaggio, who is one of the writers of this piece that this video is based off of. At that current point, only 22 people became charter members, but now it has grown to around 51. This was whenever this was published, so it might be a little more. I haven't checked, but it's probably still in the 50s. And then on top of this, more and more colleges are opening up specific subdivisions for the study of forensic podiatry, such as the New York colleges in Temple University and in Philadelphia. This is becoming a more and more widely encouraged and accepted field, and the quicker, most likely, the better. So, in review, while feet might not be the shiniest or most fun part of forensics as compared to, say, ballistics, pathology, and autopsies, or even just analysis of blood patterns, it's still nonetheless just as important, and investigators can still link you to the scene of a crime just by what you leave behind on the sole of your shoe. So, watch your step. I'm done.
I remember when